Welcome to the 2020 Buckeye Book Fair. Thank you for joining us for this series of virtual events with Ohio authors and illustrators. The Buckeye Book Fair provides an annual celebration of literacy through author visits, educational programs for K-12 students, and events for people of all ages. All of the books featured today and throughout the entire Buckeye Book Fair are available for purchase at buckeyebookfair.org. Should you have any questions for the presenters, please click on the Q&A button and type them in the window that appears, and they'll be answered later in the session. Hello, and welcome to the 2020 Buckeye Book Fair Author-to-Author Ohio History Panel Session. My name is Russell Cross, one of the board members for the book fair, and my role tonight is to introduce our panelists. The father-daughter duo of David Meyers and Elise Meyers Walker are historians and writers who frequently collaborate on a range of projects. In Historic Black Settlements of Ohio, they trace the development of over 40 settlements that developed in the years leading up to the Civil War, but which now have all but been erased from Ohio's landscape. Karen Robertson is Ohio-born and raised, and she's currently the Assistant Curator of Manuscripts at the Ohio History Connection. Her book, Little Ohio, presents 100 of the state's tiniest towns and miniature villages with populations under 500 people, featuring full-colour photographs, fun facts, and details about what makes each community unique. Nancy Stearns Theiss is the Executive Director of the Oldham County Historical Society and has written history columns for the Louisville Courier-Journal and the Oldham Era. In her latest work, A Tour on the Underground Railroad along the Ohio River, it's a clear and well laid out guide to relevant and noteworthy Underground Railroad sites along or near both sides of the Ohio River. Bob Batchelor is a critically acclaimed cultural historian and biographer and currently teaches in the Media, Journalism and Film Department at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. His illustrated history, entitled Rookwood, The Rediscovery and Revival of an American Icon, tells the compelling story of this famous artisanal ceramics company, which is still operating in the heart of the Ohio River Valley from its founding to the present day. Vic Fleischer has worked as a professional archivist for over 2 decades and currently serves as the head of archival services at the University of Akron. In The Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, A Photographic History, he visually chronicles the rich and fascinating history of Goodyear, highlighting the products that helped make it a household name and make Akron the rubber capital of the world. Nannette Maciejunes is the Executive Director of the Columbus Museum of Art and the author of many books on art history. Her book, Reflections, The American Collection of the Columbus Museum of Art, features more than 125 selected works from the museum's catalogue, accompanied by concise essays by scholars of art who reflect on and respond to the distinctive aspects of each work. Ken Rusk is a blue-collar construction business entrepreneur who has launched multiple successful and extremely profitable endeavours over the past 30 years. Based on his insights and experience as an entrepreneur, mentor and life coach, his book, Blue Collar Cash, provides a step-by-step interactive guide to creating alternative and realistic routes to success and fulfillment. And here now is our moderator for this session, Bob Batchelor, with the first question for our panelists.
Hi, everybody. We are going to turn this Ohio history panel over to Nancy with your first group of authors, and thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Bob. I'm so excited to introduce these books tonight, Historic Black Settlements of Ohio and Little Ohio, 100 Towns Below 500 People. And then my book is called A Tour on the Underground Railroad along the Ohio River. And so where I'm sitting right now is in my office, but it's also the Amanda and James Mount House, and it's on the National Park Service, National Underground Railroad Network. These 2 people were slaveholders, and they're on the network because we have documents that show there are runaway slaves that left to join for the Union. So my book, what I did with it was went up and down the Ohio River to show these different points along the Underground Railroad that had been documented. And I was so excited to see these two books, Historic Black Settlements, as well as Little Ohio, because so many of these places that I started looking at along the Ohio River with the Underground Railroad involve small towns and historic Black settlements. So I think we'll learn a lot tonight and we'll have a really good time. Just a little bit on the book that I wrote is that to follow this book, you can go east to west or west to east along the Ohio River. You can start down in Owensboro in Kentucky on the slave side. And what I started finding were all these connections among people on both sides of the river that helped each other as conductors, or they were freedom seekers. And when they made it to safety, they ended up becoming Underground Railroad conductors themselves. An example is Harriet Beecher Stowe's book in Cincinnati. She actually used a lot of the characters in her books were Kentuckians who ended up in Ohio. Josiah Henson, for instance, in Owensboro, who was enslaved, was the model for her Uncle Tom. And regardless of what the Uncle Tom name means to some people, he was an extremely brave man who took his family finally. He had a horrible childhood, and he took his family in Owensboro, and they finally escaped, and they made it up in Canada, where he established a refugee colony. And he was good friends with Harriet Beecher Stowe. She interviewed him when she was in Cincinnati. So there are all these really great connections. When you go up the river, you'll see in Louisville, which was the slave trade town, there was a lot of people who were held in jails and sold down the river. That was the south side, but then you go immediately on the north side of the river, and you have these people lining up sort of along the river to help people escape to freedom. When Harriet Beecher Stowe came to Cincinnati, she met people like the Levi Coffins, who were Quakers. And I know Karen discusses Quaker villages a lot up in Ohio, and that group was involved in the Underground Railroad. She has people like Henry Bibb, who's here from Oldham County. She was familiar with him. Madison, Indiana became a strong crossing. But in particular, when I was writing the book, I was sort of charmed with the area between Cincinnati going up to Ripley, Ohio. And that's because, first of all, it's well preserved and it's beautiful scenery. But second of all, you had Ripley, which was sort of the Underground Railroad town, with John Rankin and his house on top of a high point. And then you had John Parker, a Black man who brought his freedom and became a conductor on the Underground Railroad. And he lived right there at the river. And also, there was some very interesting places that are not right on the river, but I learned about, called the Gist colonies. And David and Elise are going to talk about those. Karen, you might, I don't know, we had talked before maybe about that too. But the basic thing is that all of these places on our panel tonight are local public history places. Some of the Black settlements have all but disappeared, but Elise and David are going to explain that. But you can actually go to some of these areas and experience history yourself. And keep in mind, places like the Ohio River were about half their size. So there was a lot of business on the river and people crossing every day, both who were enslaved and both who were freedom seekers. And the border of the Ohio River and some of these small towns that we're going to discuss tonight were not necessarily, when people arrived there who were freedom seekers or who had been enslaved, you would think on the free side of the Ohio area that they would have been welcomed in the community. But I find that in tonight's stories, we'll probably find different places. So I'm delighted to be here. Welcome to the John and James Amount House, which is on the National Park Service again, under National Underground Railroad Network. And let's start with Karen tonight, okay? Karen, tell us a little bit about your background and why did you write this book? What was its appeal? So let's go with your background.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Karen. So nice to meet you all out there in Zoom world. So my background, I'm a trained historian and I work as a curator at the Ohio History Connection in Columbus, which is actually the largest city in Ohio. So it was really great going to all these small places from what is technically the largest. So we're the State Historical Society for Ohio. And one of the things that I do in my job there is write for our blog. And so that's kind of similar to the book in that in these very like kind of short, quick narratives based on archival material, telling like little, very personal pieces of Ohio history. And my publisher, their goal is for these little state books to be written for each of the 50 states. And Ohio was up next.
So the History Press, I think. The History Press, is that your book?
It's Adventure Keen is the
Adventure, okay. So they went through so people can look for this book, but they can start looking for books all over. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I believe Michigan came right before me, so that's kind of close to Ohio there too. Okay. Yeah, so they were looking for an author for this book, and they found my work on the blog and talked to me a little bit about it, and I thought it was a great opportunity that fits in with what I do every day, anyway. So.
And what's you did all the photographs too?
Yes. So in addition to writing about all these towns, I visited all 100 of them.
Wow.
Yes, there were a lot of outtakes, which I put together in a little video for the book fair. There's lots of pictures of me playing on playgrounds in all of these towns. So yeah, I also got to visit all of them, which was very cool. Sometimes I visited before I wrote about it, and so then when I wrote about it, I could really picture it. And sometimes I visited after I wrote about it, and then I was just like a tourist, like very excited to see these things. So the travel was a big part of it.
I like there's a lot of diversity too in these small towns. So could you talk a little bit about some of the settlements and how they started? And before that, all of these towns are pretty active and alive today, right? I mean, these are all towns you can visit. Is correct?
Yes. These are all still towns that exist. They have some of them are incorporated more of them are incorporated than not. Okay. But they're all at least like their populations are counted. Yeah.
So let's talk about the diversity, some of your favorites. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just kind of talking on diversity, there are kind of a couple different ways that I wanted the book to be diverse. Geographically was kind of the big one when I first started pulling towns before I really knew a lot about them. I had a map of Ohio and I wanted them to hit all the points. And I didn't think that would be so easy, but it just kind of naturally happened that there are small towns all over Ohio. So that was kind of a happy little accident there. I also wanted the stories to be diverse as far as like the time period that I was talking about. So we go, all the way back before statehood. And then I think the most modern story I told was in 2017 in Celeryville. There were some conflicts over migrant workers. And then I also wanted it to be diverse demographically as well, obviously, and kind of allow the complications of the story to exist. I didn't want it to be like an easy little narrative. So one of the kind of examples of that is the town of Rushville is well known as an Underground Railroad town. It's well known for the Hanby family, the Hanby house is in Columbus. So I see that all the time. And he wrote the song Up on the Rooftop, but was also involved in the Underground Railroad. But there's also a story from Rushville of a lynching. And so those two stories together, I think, tell kind of that more complicated narrative that I was trying to get forth.
Yeah, the Quaker towns came out just because, for my interest, just because of Levi and Catherine Coffin, who were not from Ohio, really. I think they first were up in Indiana, then came to Cincinnati. So there was a Quaker town festival, the Quaker City?
Yeah, Quaker City is now known for the folk music festival that they have once a year. And the very first one was attended by Anne Grimes, who's a fairly well-known Ohioan. We like to talk about her at the Ohio History Connection a lot because then we get to listen to her music. So I suggest giving her a listen. It's kind of interesting you mentioned the Quaker towns because another kind of diverse thing that popped up that I didn't expect was how the towns were formed or why. And so there were a lot that kind of fit into that like Quaker bucket. And then you have like Yankee Lake up at near Toledo. They formed because the guy who owned the city ran a bar and he wanted to be able to sell liquor on Sundays and have dancing. And
That's
the city
reasonable.
as a part of wouldn't allow that, so he formed his own city. So some of the ways that these towns formed were very diverse as well, which was really interesting.
Yeah, and I liked the Rock Bridge sounded neat because it reminded me of Red River Gorge area in East Kentucky. Can you describe that? It's a recreational area, right?
Yeah, so Rockbridge is part of the Hocking Hills area, which is a pretty common like recreational hiking area in Ohio. This was really cool because I've actually like had been to Rockbridge before I even thought about this book. I'd been out there hiking, and then realizing that there's a town right next door. That was kind of a neat little realization, and getting to drive through the town instead of just going to go hiking.
I love the guy that Griffith, the guy who's the Shakespearean. I thought that was really funny. Could you tell about him a little bit?
Yeah, so he was from Stockdale in the early 1900s, and he was just obsessed with Shakespeare. He had most of Shakespeare's works committed to memory and traveled around performing them, and tried to turn his house into a replica of Shakespeare's house. And so he was just kind of known as the Shakespeare guy. And so I was just reading a county history about this town, and there he was.
Is the house still standing?
Sorry, what'd you say?
Is the house still standing?
No, I don't believe so. And I think I misspoke. I think I said Stockdale. He's from West Farmington.
Okay. Another thing that I found was really interesting is that most people probably don't think about was the system of canals in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked about canal towns, and they formed because of the canals. Can you tell a little bit about the history of the canals and the towns that formed there?
Yeah, so kind of the way to like track yourself like through time through this book, through transportation. And so the first big way that towns pop up is via Zane's Trace, which there is a whole town that talks about him. And then we get to canals, and then we get to railroads, and then we get to highways. And so towns pop up, the next form of transportation comes through, and then towns get small again. So there's a couple big canal towns where you can still go see the locks. I believe the image of me that played in the intro video, that's me at the Lockington Locks, which I highly suggest that visit. It's very cool to just kind of see the system is still there, but we're not using it.
Yeah, I found that's a segue for me because I think the canals for the Underground Railroad, a lot of people went along these canals, and I think there were some black settlements. Is that right? When we talk about the historic black settlements, were there any around canals? Was curious.
Not that I know of. I'll leave that question.
Yeah, David and Elise Meyers Walker and David Myers. I was excited about your book as well, as I said before. What are some of the things that you found out that you didn't know? Well, first of all, before I ask that question, right up front in your book, you talk about diversity and sort of define, what is a black settlement, or what is being black versus what is being white, or whatever. Could you hit a little bit on that and how that was complicated?
Yeah, first, Nancy, thanks for talking to us tonight, and thank you to all the attendees. We're excited to be here with you. I'm a little jealous, Nancy. We are currently located in the basement of a nondescript mid-century house in Columbus. There's history here, but not like where you're sitting, so I'm very jealous of where you get to spend your days. You asked us about race and how to define race, and that's been an interesting topic. Well, we'll go ahead and out ourselves. We are white people, my father and I, but just in case anybody didn't know, that's what we are, German actually heritage, but we have written about people of all different races in our careers as local authors. And the idea of race actually as a concept in our writing began before this book. We previously wrote a book on Italian Americans and the start of organized crime in America, and specifically in Ohio, which is where organized crime started in America. And it's really interesting because in the time period we're writing about, the Italian American immigrants were not considered white. I do tours occasionally, historic tours, and we talk about diverse neighborhoods, and the diverse neighborhoods are Black people and the white people, but also the Italians and the Irish living side by side, getting along. What we think of as race changes constantly. And so the idea, and race is a social construct anyway. There's nothing biological about any part of it. It's social, it's familial, it's a number of things. And especially at the end of the Civil War, race got really kind of mixed up and interesting. And that is what we talk about in the opening of our book.
Yeah. We also wrote a previous book too called Lynching and Mob Violence in Ohio, which really touches upon race and, what we consider to be Black people, African-American people, were lynched out of proportion to their numbers. But one of the other factors was being an outsider. And that seems to be, a real issue throughout history. Even if everybody looks the same, you can still identify those who are outsiders.
They look different, they speak differently, they have a different religion than we do, they are different economically than we are. All of those things.
Yeah, those are great points. And also, people don't understand your historic Black settlements, you told me early, kind of disappeared after the Civil War because, there were opportunities. People wanted to get out. There's more things happening. But I found that when we look at the historic Black settlements, it's so nice that you identified them because they were so important, as the Civil War was building up. I mean, and also there were so many free Blacks, both on the slave side of the river, the south side of the river, who came over to the north side to help people, cross the river and get into some of these settlements that were on the Underground Railroad. I think the Gist settlement for me was extremely important, and it's hard to explain. Can you explain the Gist settlement and what you found out about that?
Well, one of the things our book really points out, we discuss 43 different settlements in Ohio, and there are probably at least 100 different settlements, but it's very hard to find documentation on them. But a number of these settlements came about because slave holders decided to free their slaves, usually upon their death. They put it in their wills that they would be freed. Some decided to do it while they were still alive, but in slave states, you weren't free to just liberate your slaves. If you're going to liberate them, you need to take them someplace else to a free state. And Ohio was the first free state from its inception. And so what you had were a number of slave owners that decided that Ohio would be the place to bring their slaves and free them. And we discussed, the Randolph slaves and the Gist slaves were the two largest slave holders. And the Randolph came and the Gist basically populated a number of these communities just because their slave holdings were so large. They were freeing 400 or more slaves at one time. And
that's a whole town for you, Karen. Yeah. That's a whole brand new town for your book. It's 400 people out of nowhere.
And what they both involved were because these were both released after the slave owner died, and agents were commissioned by the court to go out and buy land for these. Well, they ran into problems with the Randolph slaves because the land they purchased, the people wouldn't allow them to settle there. So they were driven back to the canal boats, and then they were dispersed through northwestern Ohio. With the Gist slaves, they bought some extremely bad land for them in Brown County and in Hillsborough and Highland County, and settled them there, expecting them to be able to sustain themselves by farming. And most of these were farming communities. Well, the land in Brown County was basically unfarmable. And not only that, a lot of these slaves weren't farmers, or if they were farmers, they weren't used to growing the types of crops that we grow in Ohio. Now they knew how to tend cotton, and they knew how to tend tobacco, which grows down along the Ohio River,
but not so well.
Yeah,
middle and northern
yeah,
Ohio.
but you're in the middle of the state, and they're expected to live off of this. And you had problems with the gift slaves, especially where the guy who purchased the land also kept the title for it himself. And so land that was supposed to be in the name of these slaves, he was holding on to it. And that meant that when taxes came due, none of them individually knew that they were responsible for paying taxes on this land.
Wow.
And what you see happening in a lot of these situations throughout the state was that they ended up losing the land because it was sold for back taxes. That happened with gift slaves. It happened with slaves in the southeastern part of the state as well, former slaves, formerly. And so this was their inheritance, and it basically was taken back from them.
And it's there was a question. It's GIST, G-I-S-T. I don't think we're enunciating clearly enough for where we are in the basement.
Yeah,
G-I-S-T.
I found that some of these settlements, like you're describing, these early ones, people that were on the front of the Underground Railroad at the Ohio River itself, as people crossed, then they were kind of, a lot of times they were directed towards these settlements to sort of hide out for a while and blend in as well as they could, and then keep on going forward. And did you have any black settlements along the canals? The reason this canal, like Karen was talking about, I found that some of the people who were freedom seekers used the canals for direction, because all these canals went up to the Great Lakes where you could cross, to Detroit and go up to Canada.
Yeah, they generally didn't locate along the canals because that would attract attention.
And that would also be some prime land too, if you had work along there, and they were not being granted prime land by any means. Except for a couple of instances, these groups were being given the worst possible land. We talk about the agents were either crooked by nature or just
very naive
and trying their best. But either way, a lot of the land that was purchased for the enslaved people was terrible land.
Yeah, I found in Ohio had passed these black laws, that applied specifically to blacks that had just come into Ohio. Cincinnati, particularly, they didn't want runaway fugitives. And then when they did the Fugitive Act of 1850, that allowed bounty hunters to start going into Ohio. And I'm sure they must have gone into these settlements that you all studied, to get to for people, bounty hunters, after the Fugitive Act of 1850. So,
yes. Yeah. They were coming into the settlements long before that. Yeah. I mean, they were coming into Ohio as soon as the fugitives were coming into Ohio. They were being chased down. That's why, even though Ripley was a hotbed of abolitionism, very few, the emancipated slaves were going to stay there. They sent them further north because there was a real risk of being recaptured.
You mentioned the black laws. I mean, speaking about citizens of this country and the restrictions that were put on them, I mean, you would have to, in some places, have your bond ready of a certain amount of money when you came to town as a promise that if you committed crimes or did anything awful, this money could be used. The whole idea of having a bond ready when you've done nothing is...
Well, at this point, they weren't citizens.
Right. I'm sorry.
Citizens. They had all kinds of restrictions on their liberty after they got here. Mm-hmm. But with the fugitive slave law, you had a situation where, citizens were required to assist in the recapture of the slaves. And this was a major factor in ginning up support for the Union cause in the Civil War, is that Ohio citizens didn't like being told they had to capture fugitive slaves.
Well,
But that was the law.
and the point I was going to make about the onerous nature of the Black laws is you could be a freed person, legally 100% clear free. And if you didn't have all your ducks in a row and all your papers ready to go all the time, you could potentially be snatched back. And that is another reason why you wouldn't want to necessarily stick around too long in an area if you knew there were slave hunters frequenting the area.
Yeah.
We mentioned earlier too, I think another thing that really helped with the Union cause against slavery was, I think it would astound people to know how light-skinned a number of these former enslaved peoples were. We don't mince words, we don't romanticize. Rape was a common occurrence for a lot of enslaved women. And as a result, you ended up with generations and generations and generations of people who, I mean, could very easily pass as white. And again, considering that race is
that were lighter than their owners.
Lighter than their owners, because they were probably a sibling of their owner from, share the same grandpa.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's why a lot of slaveholders would sell slaves that they had fathered to get them out of their household, and send them all down the river. Henry Bibb, who was very light-skinned, and his father was white, said his mother, he was one of 7, each by a different father. So, horrible situation. And today, the more blended the society is, and the more diverse, we've sort of been a blended race for generations here in the United States.
And I think one of the neat things about, we say a lot of these settlements are gone because people, one, they were not able to keep the land a lot of times due to the issues we mentioned earlier, but other times they wouldn't want to. Post-Civil War, they would move around. They'd go to the city to find a job, but also if you were light enough, you might disappear to some place where somebody didn't know that you were born into slavery. We also saw instances of the former enslaved people marrying into the Native American tribes, and a lot of mixing there that helped also disperse these out. They were pretty quickly no longer just former enslaved people's encampments. They were different towns full of diversity.
And there were a lot of soldiers, Black soldiers. The reason I'm saying that right now is a lot of people don't know that during the Civil War and in these settlements, there were a lot of men who fought in the Union armies who were Black. And in Kentucky, we've identified thousands of men who joined for the Union after Lincoln said you could go muster in at Camp Nelson or Camp Taylor in Kentucky. So it's fascinating, but I want to get to questions. Before we get to questions, social media contacts for you, Karen, and social media contacts for David and Elise, okay? So Karen, how do people contact you?
People can contact me through my publisher, Adventure Keen. They have a Facebook page that I suggest checking out, especially if you're interested in other kind of like Ohio tour stuff like that.
Do you have another book in the works?
I don't have anything in the works at the moment.
Okay. How about you all, David and Elise? How about contacts for you?
Yeah, so we exist online as Exploding Stove, all one word. We are at Exploding Stove on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We also are www.explodingstove.com. We recommend that you check that out because there were a lot of names of people that we were not able to include in this Black Settlements book. We have a limit on how many pages we have. So on our website, www.explodingstove.com, we have listed every single founder, former enslaved person's name for every settlement that we were able to find. So that is there to be seen. We also in February stuck it on our Instagram too. So if that's your medium,
really
feel free to put it on there too.
We have another book coming out March called A Murder in Amish, Ohio, The Martyrdom All Koblenz. Plus we have 3 other books that are virtually done. So, so we have a lot of projects.
And we had, a dozen before this one. So please check us out. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, we are in Giant Eagle, we are in Walgreens sometimes. We've been in Costco, depending on your local Costco. Otherwise.
But today they can buy them through Buckeye Book.
But Buckeye Book Fair has signed copies that no one else has. So please check that out.
Yeah, and identity is so important as we go into the past in all these communities and identify the people who once lived there. and what the area was like. It just gives us a better sense of history. And these are stories that people haven't heard. Or these small towns, I mean, they're everywhere. Is there a good map that people can follow to find these towns? How would you suggest they find those places, Karen?
So if you buy the book, when you first open it, there's a map of all the towns in the front.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's the best way to do it. I have a Google Maps version if anybody wants me to share that with you personally, but yeah, I suggest buying the book.
I love this. I'm looking at the Q&As. I don't see any up here, but right now that I know of. But unless it's just not, unless someone wants to help me with that, other than me, I don't see anything going on. I did want to ask you all, David and Elise, as we close this and we go over to Bob, what was your, I was interested in this Godfrey Brown settlement. He seemed like a very interesting person in the Black settlements. You know,
Yes, that was in Greene County. And he was a remarkable individual when you consider that, you know, this is an uneducated Black man who came to Ohio and was able to purchase land, was able to make it productive, was able to purchase more land, and then went and purchased land in these some of the other Black communities. And he became very wealthy and became kind of a magnet for other, Black free and fugitives. And it was showing what he, you imagine what could he have done if he had had the advantages of an average person, not having been a slave. So there's remarkable stories like that are in the book.
Yeah, I love that. And going back to you, Karen, I love this and I want to know the answer, what it is. In Stockdale, they say they have the perfect maple tree. So what does that mean? What is a perfect maple tree?
So there's a bit of a story behind this one, but my understanding is that it has to do with the shape. I looked at a lot of pictures and tried to better understand it, and I don't know. There's something about the shape. So I also tried to go see it when I was there. I was like, this will be the perfect picture for the book. We got a picture of the perfect tree. I found I Googled it, that had like the longitude and the latitude and everything. And I rolled up and it was like a fire department in the middle of the road. I never found the perfect tree. If anybody has seen it and wants to send me a picture, I would really like to see it. I spent probably about an hour driving back and forth trying to locate the perfect.
Maybe they're just all perfect.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of trees in the area, which was not helpful to my quest. But yeah, I never got to see it, and that was a big disappointment.
I know, you'd think if they're going to call it the perfect maple tree, it would be highlighted, unless it fell down.
Yeah, it has recently, I think, the land's recently been donated to the public to be preserved. So there is a lot of.
I was very excited. As moderator, I got free copies of each of your books, and I hope that everybody listening tonight buys all three of our books because they are all very connected. And now I want to go see some of these small towns because LaGrange, which is where I am in right now, was once a small town. Now we have more than 500 people. And then those historic Black.
They all make great holiday presents for your end of year December holidays. They would all make excellent gifts.
They do. And it's so great. You can get in your car and explore these areas like Godfrey Brown, because he made his mark there, right? It's still around what he did. So,
well, there are some things in the area. I mean, we've got pictures of things that are still standing. Okay. In most cases, there isn't anything standing there. In quite a few instances, they seem to be under reservoirs. It was land that was prone to flooding anyway, so when they created reservoirs in Ohio, they seem to flood that land.
That's interesting.
We have one just north of Columbus, Little Africa, just north of Columbus, that is under Allen Creek Reservoir. We have Africa Road, but
I noticed. Yeah, and in the South, anytime there seemed to be a Black settlement, they always called it Black or Little Africa, which was
too, a lot of these trips are very social distance friendly. Like if you want to
Yeah.
go to Lockington Locks or in Zaleski, there's the Moonville Tunnel, which is known to be haunted. These are all outdoor social distance friendly things to do. So that's kind of a plus.
And I have to tell you, when I was writing my book, I was amazed along the Ohio River. All these small towns they have a lot of pride. A lot of times there's small museums, historical markers. You can just go and visit these places and have a ball. That's what, when I wrote my book, it took me about a year. My husband and I would just travel out, and it was when you come across communities like a German community, and then all these places along the river have parks for children, and I mean, it's really fun. And I'm very impressed. Like I said, my favorite place is between Cincinnati. They have a beautiful scenic driveway, but I know there's some north in Ohio that I don't know about. Anyway, thank you all so much. I'm going to hand this over.
There's a question for Karen.
Ah.
Karen, would you consider your book readable by an elderly individual? Font size, overall size of the book?
I think it's fairly readable. The font is maybe a little bit small, but I think it's readable. It's kind of like a coffee table book size.
Okay. Thank everybody, and that concludes this first session. Nice to meet you all through this virtual presentation. And Bob, I'm handing it to you.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. That was really fantastic. I deeply appreciate being able to listen to that great discussion of Ohio history. We're going to move to our second session. We have three great authors with us. I think that what I'm going to do is ask a question and then just have Nannette, Vic, Ken answer in that order, and then I'll add some comments myself. And I think we'll just go in kind of a round table feel like that. The first question I have, and each one of you will be able to answer this in your own way based on your wonderful, wonderful books, is that particularly Nannette, this is going to be one for you, for everybody. Art reflects not only the times that it was created in, but also it becomes art because it has such impact today. What do you feel, each of you, that your book tells us about this really critically important historical moment that we're in? I think each one of your books really speaks not only to the era in which it focuses on, but particularly to a pivotal moment today.
Wow. So that's a good one to start with. That is true. The book that, of course, that I worked on has many, many authors, and each of them brought, the whole point of the book was so that we did not just have art historians talking about art history at people. We love art historians, but it was the idea of bringing different people's perspective to, from different disciplines. Joyce Carol Oates wrote for the book because she loves George Bellows. Adam Gopnik from the New Yorker wrote for the book. So we tried to bring these different voices, and it's very, very true that it is what becomes enduring because human beings only take care of what they value, right? We only, as human beings, it's in our DNA. We only take care of things that we truly value. And so the work of art has to continue to have resonance for us to value it. There's a wonderful Reginald Marsh, who's a mid-century American painter, a wonderful big watercolor in the museum's collection, which takes you back to a moment in time right at the beginning of World War II. But when you then look at it today, the mix of people, and there is an African-American man that is quite front and center in this picture. And today you see it very differently than you would have, Reginald Marsh would have seen it. So I do think, yes, that it's got to be something that brings us, and also just beauty. Beauty is another thing that, you know, in this time of great stress and extraordinary anxiety, people can find solace in art. They can find comfort in that. I think that's also part of it. So.
Great. How about you? Let's go Vic and then Ken, and then I'll add some words myself.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Great question. Thanks for having me here. First of all, this is my first book and first Buckeye Book Fair and first virtual book fair. So very interesting, very exciting for myself and all of us here in my household. So very pleased to be able to be a part of this this conversation tonight. So that might be a kind of a hard question for me. So I think the first part of it, you know, how art reflects the time. Well, obviously, you know, my book is mostly a photographic history. It's mostly a popular history written for a general audience, even though it is somewhat scholarly. I used a number of primary resources to write the text and large photo captions that go with the book. My background is as an archivist and a curator. So I always think more information, the better. Publishers don't always think that. So I've actually cut this book by a third. Cut it in half and then cut it again. So anyway, but you know, our collection, maybe we'll get into this question later. So I got into this book because I'm head of the archives at the University of Akron, and we have this wonderful collection of historic photographs of the Goodyear Tire. Nailing that down to it's just under 200 was a very difficult task, but obviously, can you hear me? It looks like you're frozen up.
We can hear you.
Yeah.
I'm back. Do we have you, Vic?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Internet connection was great all night. As soon as I start talking, it goes out. I apologize. Not sure. We have a little spotty internet connection. Not sure how much of that you caught, but you know, it is a photographic history book, so you know, it does reflect the time. All of the images are a short capture, time capsule of that period in time in the company's and the country's history. As the former Goodyear photographer put it, you know, he said the country's history is in those files, in these photographic files. So a lot of interesting history there that's captured in those images. A lot of them are aesthetically pleasing, historically significant, and those are the ones I tried to capture for the book. And let's see how it tells about, you know, what's going on today. You know, that might be a little more tougher for me to answer because the book ends in 1951. Although you know, I was going to share this a little bit later, but I can mention it now. So you know, the Goodyear collection is one of our more heavily used at the University of Akron. It's one of our flagship collections. You know, it seems like everybody in Akron has some connection with the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, a parent, a grandparent, great-grandparent that worked there, products that they've used over the years. So people really have an affinity and a love for that history. But, you know, it's interesting with everything going on today with the politics and things that are now kind of settling down. So the day my book was released in September, the day I went on the local radio program to promote it, and we were doing all the promotion, is the day Trump said to boycott Goodyear products. So I was a little concerned that would hurt sales, but I think here in Akron and Northeast Ohio, we all rally behind our you know, manufacturing and support Ohio business. So I think it actually might have spiked sales. So maybe I should be thanking him. So anyway, so that's kind of how it connects with today. And you know, in regards to you know, race, social class, you know, there was one criticism of an early draft of my book, and that I mentioned the diversity of the products, the diversity of the Goodyear workforce over the years, but wasn't expressed in the early drafts of some of the images. And that's because, unfortunately, you know, that period in time that I cover, the founding of the company, 1898 through 1951, unfortunately, folks like African Americans, people with disabilities, people, even deaf workers that they hired, Akron became the crossroads of the deaf in the teens, 20s, and 30s. They were unfortunately relegated to more manual task, the cleaning of the rubber, the processing, the raw rubber, janitorial service, elevator operators. Unfortunately, they weren't the ones working on the line producing the products, at least until World War II. So, but there are some of those images in there. So, but, thanks.
Okay, great. Ken, I think your book speaks to today like few do. So I think this is maybe less artistic and more to the times.
Well, yes, and again, thank you for having me. You know, one of the reasons that I wrote this book was because I recognized as an employer in the different endeavors that I have over 200 employees, and hiring people is always a challenge. And I began to notice really quickly that there was this serious undersupply of people that were willing to work with their hands, you know, blue collar workers. And one of the things that caused that was, you know, the age-old, time-tested supply and demand theory, which is an efficient marketing theory that seems to always work unless it's manipulated. And in our case, we have what we began to do when we took shop classes out of high school and we replaced those rooms with computers. You know, obviously computers, we needed to learn those for sure, but it eliminated millions of kids from accidentally discovering carpentry and plumbing and welding and home economics and all those types of endeavors. And what happened was we kind of drove all these kids into a societal expectation that said, you have to go to college or you won't amount to anything. And what that did is it began oversupplying college graduates with, you know, non-specific business degrees that all they did was they gathered a lot of debt and didn't have a lot of prospects when they got out of school. And on the opposite side of that, we seriously undersupplied, again, carpenters, welders, those types of people that are willing to work with their hands. And what I wanted to do was highlight the amazing opportunities that are out there for blue collar workers, not only from the supply and demand side, but also from the financial side. It's no secret that in my part of town, we have finished carpenters that are making as much or more than family doctors. And it's just because of that whole supply and demand scenario. So what I wanted to do with the book, Blue Collar Cash, was to first set kids up to understand that if you're a carpenter or you're a plumber or a welder or anything that you do with your hands, that's not a job that has a stigma attached to it. So I really try to erase the stigma first off, and then I get them thinking long-term about what their lives could look like if they only sat down and just envisioned what that perfect life would be for them, and then go find a career that could support that. I'm not an anti-college guy. I'm an anti-college is for everybody guy. And I think with the crisis that we face with blue collar workers and the shortage thereof in today's environment, I thought it was very timely, and it's been very well received. So I've been very fortunate. It got picked up by HarperCollins, and it's gone. I didn't think it would go 10 feet, much less the 10 miles that it's gone. And we're really happy that we're able to teach some of these kids that there's alternative paths to success.
Fantastic. Yeah, these three books are fantastic. Listeners now, tonight, and into the future on YouTube, these are three books you got to pick up. They're each wonderful in their own right. I would say for my book, Rookwood, for those that don't know, Rookwood is really the home of art pottery and the birthplace of art pottery in America. The interesting thing, and one of the reasons I wrote this book, is because Mariah Longworth Storer founded Rookwood in 1880. This is a time when not only were women not artists, but they were certainly not business founders. She is the first female in American history to found a manufacturing company.
Wow.
Other women had inherited manufacturing companies when their husbands died, but Mariah began this in Cincinnati, which at the time was the Great American West. So 40 years before women gained the right to vote, Mariah starts this company. Within 10 years, it is considered one of the best potteries in the world, competing with European and Asian companies that had been around for hundreds or thousands of years. Rookwood was really like a high-tech startup. It was the upper echelon of mixing the science and process of making pottery. And so for this time period, I thought it was really important in an era in female empowerment. Mariah Longworth Storer is a hero that we should put up on a pedestal. But even in the Cincinnati area, many people don't know who she is or know much about Rookwood, which still exists to this day. I was just at Rookwood's factory yesterday signing books so that they could sell them at their holiday open house, and they still make beautiful pottery and architectural tiles. So it's an important 140-year history for the company, and this is a big year. So that's my take on that. I'll move to the next question. What I find in these kind of panels and what readers want to know is, what can we take away from your book? What is it that they can learn? Because we're asking people to turn off Netflix or put on some light music, curl up with a book and read, and we all hope for that. So maybe just the most direct question is, what do you hope readers will take away? So we'll just start again with Nannette, go to Vic, Ken, and then I'll bat clean up tonight.
I think the thing that we're hoping people take away from the Reflections book is, an insight into how extraordinary the American collection at the Columbus Museum of Art is. It's one of those books that you can have on your bedside table and you can read a few pages because, these entries, none of them are longer. I mean, the longest early collections essay, the book has also collections essays there, maybe 10 pages, but most of the book, the entries are 2 and 3 pages long. You are able to get someone's insight to a work of art in just a few pages. And one of my favorite parts of the book is that these intersection essays where we have 2 writers talking about the same work of art from 2 different perspectives. We own a beautiful William Harnett, which is a big trompe-l'oeil still life. It's of hunting implements and a hat, a great alpine hat hanging on the back of a door. And the 2 people that are writing on, one is a really interesting art historian who gives you the sort of way an art historian, a scholar would look. The other is a renowned naturalist who's actually the grandson of a well-known architect. And he brings insight. I have taken care of, at the museum, I've taken care of this painting for 35 years. And he told me things about this picture that I would never know, because he talks about the sprig of grass that sticks out of the horn is a certain kind of grass that grows in Poland that the Eastern buffalo eat, that you make a certain kind of vodka out of. And I was like, no idea. So I think what we're really, I think it's the insight into the museum's collection, how important, one of the most important 20th century painters that ever was, George Bellows, came from Columbus, Ohio. And one of the very most important self-taught artists of the history of the world, Elijah Pierce, came from Columbus, Ohio. And they both, actually he came from Mississippi, but he spent most of his adult life here. Those 2 artists are in our collection, and learning that. And I think the other thing is the cacophony of voices, not just the cacophony of the writers' voices, not the 72 writers, but also the cacophony of and perspectives of the artists themselves, how they convey the American experience. Because it takes all of us to realize that it is the experience of all of us that brings us the American experience. So I think those are some of the things I'm hoping people take away.
Okay, I guess I'm next. I could spend quite a bit of time talking about this. I'll try to keep it brief. There's a number of things I think I'd like people to take away from the book. So the reason I got involved in this was because the collection was acquired shortly after I came on board as the head archivist in 2007. It was just as we spent time going through the collection, digitizing it, we got a large National Endowment for Humanities grant back in 2009 to digitize all of the early images from 1898, the founding of the company, through 1951. So that's why the book covers that time period. We picked 51 because of the cutoff for nitrate films. We wanted to make sure we were able to identify all the nitrate film. As people know, the curators, the archivists on the call know that can be very dangerous, particularly the motion picture film, not so much the stills. We want to make sure we identify that. So that's why the cutoff is 1951, because that was the time period covered in the grant project. But as we started going through and digitizing these materials, doing the description, the metadata to make them available online, it just came to me that the diversity of products, the amazing history that the company has. And I worked years ago at Stan Hewitt Holland Gardens in Akron, the former country estate of co-founder of Goodyear F.A. Cyberling and his wife Gertrude, and really thought, oh, Goodyear was just involved in making tires and blimps, right? No, there's this whole diversity of products that they made. If they could make it out of rubber and find a way to do it and promote it, they did it. Some of their earliest products were rubber horseshoes, as well as kind of losing my train of thought here, balloons and blimps and dirigibles that were used in the world wars. The holidays are coming up, and Goodyear was involved in manufacturing all of the parade balloons for the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. So from the time period this book covers, in 1927, the third Macy's parade, that was the first parade that they introduced the parade balloons through 1951. Goodyear manufactured about 70 novelty figure balloons or parade balloons for the parades. So everything that you might have remembered seeing as a kid, from Underdog to Snoopy to Pluto to the colossal turkey. So there's a lot of those things in there. They're just interesting that people don't know about Goodyear's history and about local history. Those were all manufactured right here in Akron, Ohio, in the famous balloon room, and then later in Georgia. But conveyor belts that carried coal and iron ore out of places underneath the ground and throughout the United States, and fueled American industry. So it's just an amazing company, an amazing company history. Really put Akron on the map. Somebody was talking about the canals earlier. The Ohio and Erie canals really what put Akron on the map. And then after that demise, then we had the rubber manufacturers coming in, which obviously made Akron the rubber capital of the world. So I think there's a lot of interesting things covered in the photographs that cover a variety of topics, from factory conditions, lighter than air flight, professional amateur racing are covered in there. Goodyear manufactured tires that won some of the earliest motorcycle and automotive races in the country. Women in the workforce. You had mentioned about Rookwood and being founded by a woman, and women in manufacturing. So while some of the images don't show some other diversity, they do show, particularly during the World Wars, when the women came to the factories to work and keep that going and keep those products going. So there also are chapters on all the war products that Goodyear manufactured, mostly by women, to help the Allies win both world wars. There's really interesting things in there, and I think images that a lot of people will find interesting. So thank you.
So for me, one of the things that I wanted to try to illuminate in my book is to make sure that people understood that they are a heck of a lot more in control of their lives and their futures than they think they are. They just need to take a little time and invest in visualizing what they want their lives to look like. And I have some really simple ideas, how you can take a good old pack of 64 Crayola crayons and draw your future the way you see it, and then go at it one small piece at a time. And I do that with my own employees, and it's very, very effective. So I guess the best way I can answer that question, what you can take away, is I look at the feedback that I've gotten from it, and it basically boils down to three different areas. If you're a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or uncle, and you have someone in your life that's younger that you think maybe college isn't for them, maybe they're more tactile in the way they approach life, it's a good book for them to read, and then to share that with that younger person. And the feedback I've gotten so far is some of the most amazing conversations have come up between the two of them after they've read the book and shared it together, conversations that they might not have had otherwise, which I think is a really cool feedback for me personally. I also had a lot of people who reached out to me who were maybe stuck in a cubicle on the 17th floor, and they were in their mid-30s, and they're like, how do I get out of this job? I really want to be a woodworker. I want to do crafts. I want to build furniture. How can I transition from where I thought I was, where I got dragged into, or where I just, mindlessly went to that one of these office jobs, and now I want to do this. How can I make that transition? And that's been really fun to help them with that. I'm turning into almost an involuntary life coach with no training or skill in that regard. So, but finally, I think if you're an employer and you want to build long-term loyal employees, and what I kind of coined the term that Tom Golisano uses from Paychecks, which is building entrepreneurial employees. And those are people who can actually work within your organization and feel like they own their own life. And therefore they work like they're mini owners of the company. And they eventually will look at you and say, thank you for the training. Thank you for the goal setting. Now get out of my way and let me do it. And so it's basically those three groups of people that have responded most to the book. And it's been a labor of love. It's been a lot of fun, and I continue to get good feedback. So I feel very blessed there. And congratulations to all the authors on the panel tonight. It's been really fun to listen to your stories.
For Rookwood, I think my biggest takeaway is that this is a company that in its own day was world famous. It was maybe akin to the way we think of Nike today. I mean, it's world famous. Artists with work all over the world, in museums all over the world. And also in architectural tile, still in places like Grand Central Station, the New York City subway, all through the skyscrapers of New York, all in luxury hotels all over the United States. But it's a company that had a lot of success. It had some rough points that kind of corresponded with the rough points of American history. So the Great Depression really knocked Rookwood for a loop. It limped along for a long time, and it went away for a while. So what Rookwood became didn't even matter anymore. It just meant what collectors thought it meant, or art curators, exhibit curators more precisely, but then had a rebirth at a time when America is regaining its interest in artisan crafts and craftsmanship and handcrafted. And that has enabled Rookwood to have this really interesting rebirth and still be dedicated to the ideals that it had in 1880 when Mariah Longworth Storr founded the company. There's a lot of things in the book that people, even Rookwood aficionados who are crazy pottery collectors, they've never seen before. I was able to dig out of the archives. So I hope that people will take away that there are a lot of stories throughout history in America that seem very local or regional, but they actually reflect what was going on in the larger world, not only in the United States, but globally. So that's kind of my takeaway from the book. I'll kind of segue on that. I'll ask each author. I find, at least, so maybe I'll be totally off base here, but I find that there's a favorite moment, a favorite anecdote, a favorite piece of research, something that you hope to find at the beginning and then you end up finding, or something that really tickled you about writing the book, putting the thing together, spending all the time that it takes to do a book. And so I thought maybe you could share with the audience what is your favorite moment, anecdote, piece of research. Maybe it was just a great day of writing. We all wish for those. So maybe you could share one with us and give us a sense of hope tonight as we continue on.
Oh, mine's a cautionary tale. So this book was 12 years in the making. I ran through 3 curators, I think, during this project. It started out as this dream project. We got this incredibly large national grant from the Luce Foundation. And they, what excited them about this book was the fact, because usually catalogs of museum collections are written exclusively by art historians and curators. So this idea that we had that we would hire, like, you know, we invited the head of COSI to write on a painting that had op art characteristics, that we asked Michael Weiss, who is, knows so much about fashion, that he wrote, that we'd all, and that we duplicated that across the country, not just Ohio writers, but lots of writers that brought all their own perspectives. The man who knew about Zabrovka vodka, for instance, all of that. So that gets us this fantastic grant. And then I had, and it was the idea of this brilliant curator, who's actually right on the front page as the editor, Melissa Wolf. And then she got something that I always recall, I always, having been a curator myself and now being a director, there's this, and I'm sure, I think writers get this, you get this fear that if you finish the project, you'll die. That something, I mean, that it's like, if you finish it, you know, it's this, and it's like exhibitions and books can be like, if I finish it, something horrible is going to happen. And she could never quite bring, she hires all of these brilliant writers. I mean, up days where, I mean, when you get a letter from Joyce Carol Oates saying that she's going to write a 2-page essay for your book, I mean, and Adam Gopnik, people like that, we were like, oh my Lord. And Piper Kerwin, who is of course the creator of Orange is the New Black, she wrote for the book. These were high points. We're like, but the problem became that we're a living museum. We kept collecting American art. And you can't get rid of the writers from the beginning of the book. So you just keep adding. This book should have been like a 450-page book. It is like a 700-page book because we kept adding, and then we had to, it became this, you know, running. So the cautionary tale is never write a collections book if you're still collecting, if you're going to take more than a year or two. But it was an extraordinary journey. And the number of national writers that were willing to participate brought us such, we're just so proud, and it brought such great, I think, accolades to the museum. But yeah, mine is pretty much a cautionary tale of taking 12 years to writing a book on a collection that you're still adding to.
Vic, how about you? Can't hear you.
There we go. Can you
There
hear
we
me?
go.
Yeah, sorry. I thought I hit unmute, but didn't click. I was just saying that I feel better because it only took me 6 years to write my book. So, but I'm working on volume 2. My daughter, who's 12 now, was 6 when I started. And about 2 years in, she said, "Daddy, what's taking so long? Does this book go back to the time of the dinosaurs?" I said, "No, sweetie, it only covers 53 years in the company's history." So as Nannette had mentioned, you know, some of our collections are just so diverse, so large, like this collection that, as I mentioned, somewhere, and we haven't been able to count them all, we'd still be counting between 500,000 and 1 million photographic prints and negatives. So it was very hard to select those, and I kept picking ones and then putting those aside. And so I'm hoping there will be a volume 2 at one point. This volume focuses on products. So once I talked to my publisher and he said, I need to cut. He didn't give me extra pages. He gave me so many words and so many pages and so many images and said, start cutting. So hopefully those will go in a volume 2 and 3. But one story I came across in my research, it's one of my favorites that I pulled from this book, hopefully it'll make volume 2, is in the early 1900s, a gentleman by the name of Jake DeRoser, who was a motorcycle racer back in the early days of motorcycle racing when it was on called velodromes, board tracks. They later became dubbed murderdromes. If anybody watched Harley and the Davidsons docu-series, great docu-series, really spells out how those races run, very dangerous. So Jake came to Akron, Ohio, and went to meet with the BF Goodrich company to get their tires to run on his motorcycles. And he went to Goodyear by mistake. Goodyear, Goodrich, what's the difference? Goodyear hires him on the spot, and he goes off to win every motorcycle race and break every record and put Goodyear on the map, Goodyear motorcycle tires on the map. So that's some images of that gentleman that will hopefully be in volume 2 if that ever gets done. I don't know if I have six more years to spend on another book, but we'll see. So thank you.
Well, I guess I have just two quick stories. Number one, as I was writing this book and people would say, what are you writing the book about? And I would talk about blue collar opportunities and alternative paths to success. Almost everybody would grab me by the shoulder and say, you know what? I went to school, I spent all this money on this particular thing, and I'm not even working in that field. I don't know why I did that. So, I mean, that was something that just kind of kept pushing me along because, it was pretty interesting, some of the stories that I heard. But I think one of the most fun parts I had where I would just laugh while I wrote was when I talked about the importance of time, whether it's investing with money as a young person or not wasting time, or how valuable time is as you get a little older and you think, oh my gosh, you look back on the time that you had and how efficiently you hope that you used it. But I remember a long time ago for Christmas, my staff bought me a life clock. And it's a clock that you put on your desk, and then you enter your current age and you subtract that from 78.7 years and you hit go, and it starts winding your life down by the day and the hour and the minute and the second. And so I would sit there and look at this clock and I would see, oh my gosh, a half an hour of my life just disappeared. And then I would go for the weekend and come back and I would say, oh my gosh, 3 days of my life, 72 hours just disappeared. Or if you went on vacation, you'd come back and hundreds of hours were missing from that clock. And you almost got into this sense of paranoia, like, I really have to learn how to manage my time better because it's disappearing in front of my very eyes. Well, at some point, after I got to the point where I said, I can't take this clock anymore, I literally grabbed this clock and threw it on the ground and smashed it into little pieces because I was so worried. It was just erasing my life in front of my eyes. And my staff was like, will you please get rid of that clock? We're so sorry we ever bought it for you. And so, yeah, I wrote that's a story in the book. And I remember just laughing out loud while I wrote it. So just a little fun fact there. Well,
Oh, that's great. That would do the same thing to me. I
Yeah.
once put, if you type in, when will I die to Google, you will be shocked at the things you find. But there are a lot of online death clocks, and you answer 5 questions, then they tell you when you're going to die based on actuarial charts, and that's a scary moment. You don't want to go down that path. With Rookwood, there are so many great stories that I found. I'll give you one positive. In both 1892 and then in 1895, 1892, Oscar Wilde visited Rookwood. And when Oscar Wilde toured the United States, it was as if Mick Jagger, Bono, Beyonce, all rolled into one. That's how big a celebrity he was. And then in 1895, Mark Twain came through Cincinnati twice. In both cases, Mark Twain was even bigger celebrity. I mean, we can't even compare to it would be like royalty touring the United States or something, one of the princes or something. They both came to Rookwood because everybody wanted to know what the magic was that was happening in Cincinnati. And Mark Twain, who is famous for being very anti-interior design, wrote letters, which I found in his published letters, bragging to his wife that he had Rookwood pottery. And Rookwood had just introduced a new standard glaze. It's this beautiful dark brown glaze, the color that just seems infinite when you look at it. So when artists drew on it, like if it was flowers, they would pop out of the vase because the brown glaze made it seem so infinite looking. And Mark Twain bragged about this. Oscar Wilde, who had visited a couple years earlier, prince of aesthetics and beauty, he didn't like Rookwood that much at the time because Mariah Longworth Storr, who was also an artist, she liked art that was labeled grotesque. So she liked things like salamanders and fish and dragons. I have seen vases that she drew witches on them, and like these spooky scenes. He didn't think that was really art. He thought that pottery was cool, but it wasn't really art. So one of the things that I hope to do in this book is personalize it and make the art pottery not only something that's in a museum, but things that people actually wanted to hold and put in their homes. Rookwood helped create what art pottery would be and what home decor would be for the United States. In the 1880s, there weren't many options for what we consider interior design. And there was a movement at the time which postulated that if people really wanted to live a good life, they would fill their lives with beauty. And so this is when arts and crafts and things really started to take off, and an American art formed, not just relying on Europe. So that was one of the favorite things, finding this Mark Twain letter where he's bragging about having lunch with Mariah and taking home this new pottery fresh out of the kiln. He's one of the first people to see it. He's very excited, and his celebrity at that time is something that really couldn't be duplicated.
Neat.
And yeah, believe it or not, I mean, we'd like to leave some time for questions. We have about 10 minutes left. There aren't any questions right now, so maybe people are just a little shy. But I think another fan favorite is, and you've touched on this a little bit, but perhaps quickly, a little bit about your writing process, next projects, perhaps, if you're working. We already have some glimpses here, but feel free to expound a little bit while we wait for somebody to write in with a question.
Well, my answer will be a little different from the rest of you since you're actually authors. I did contribute to this book, but in a very minor way. One of the exciting projects that we are the two books that are one that's just come out and one that's going to come out probably in another year for Columbus. We just published an incredible new book on Amina Robinson, who is an African-American artist who left us about 5 years ago. The museum is actually we are her estate. She left us everything, including her home, which we've turned into an artist fellowship space that we're rolling out. The first fellow will be there next year. But what's exciting is we're doing a major exhibition at the museum about it. It'll be our kind of centerpiece exhibition for this year. It tells you all the secrets of her house. I mean, her house was this just wonderfully stuffed jewel box of work. By the end of her life, the entire house had been turned over to art production. And at my house, a stack of stuff on the floor is just stuff on the floor. In Amina's house, her every piece of paper, everything was just suffused with meaning, and it was an incredible honor to do this show. We have two really gifted curators that have devoted years to this exhibition. So it's The Secrets of the House, and there's a beautiful new book that's coming out, that just came out. The second one is there's a major collector that lived in Columbus, Ohio. His name is Ferdinand Howd, Howald. Mr. Howd gave us much of his collection. He was a collector. He started collecting at the Armory Show in 1913 and collected up until his death. Gave us much of his collection in the early 30s when we opened the new building in 31. He was a very astute collector of American and European modernism. It's an extraordinary story. It's never been told. And we are in the process of working with a writer on that project to bring that story to light. I mean, just what you were saying, Bob, some of these stories that seem very local, and I think Vic said the same thing. These stories that sometimes seem really local actually have resonance that are national and even international. And so we're really excited to be behind that book that'll come out in probably another year to 2 years.
Great.
So for me, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, just want to make sure. So for me, I started the research process by reviewing the 23,000 photos. And yes, I looked at every one of them. Part of the reason why it took 6 years. So since we were able to digitize those as part of the grant and upload those into our digital archives, that's something I could do from home in my evenings, is just review the digital surrogates at home and in my evenings and on my weekends. So, and then I selected what I thought were the most historically significant and aesthetically pleasing ones. And then I started organizing those into sections. So it was really three themes emerged: people, places, and products. So the book was originally going to have 3 sections, but that got to be cost prohibitive. So really it just focuses on the products. So there's tires. There's 2 chapters on tires, one on airships, blimps, and dirigibles, one on balloons, one on what are called mechanical goods or industrial products, and then one on war products. So, and then I had to do the research to not only try to find information on those images, whether they were published in old company newsletters or what have you, or in some of the primary sources in the Goodyear and other collections we have. So that was one nice thing, is that everything was pretty much under one roof in our archives. So I didn't have to travel or go elsewhere. I do like to travel, but it made it easier for this project. So as I mentioned, I cut a number of things from it that I'm hoping to make into a second and possibly a third volume. We'll see. And other projects I'm working on. 2 years ago, for the centennial of the end of World War I, a colleague of mine at Stan Hewitt and I and some other local partners did a documentary film on Akron, Summit County in World War I, featuring letters and images from our archives and a number of other local collections like Stan Hewitt, the Summit County Historical Society, the Akron Summit County Public Library. So we've taken those letters and images and we're editing them, putting them into book format, and we're hoping to get that published at some point in the near future too. So, but this book had to be off my plate before I could do that. So anyway.
Awesome. Ken, I know you have some really exciting things coming up. Maybe you could tell the viewers about them.
Well, just a couple things. When you talk about the writing process, this book actually started out as a letter to my daughter about what I thought was most important in life. The 3 terms: comfort, peace, and freedom, and how, everybody has their own version or vision of what that actually is. And it just kind of grew into a book. I remember I was on an airplane and I was writing feverishly with my pen on a legal pad. And the guy sitting next to me said, "What are you doing?" Because I kept shaking my hand because it was hurting. And I said, "I think I'm writing a book." And he said, "You think you're writing a book?" And then I reached down and I pulled out 11 more filled in legal pads. And he said, I see that you're doing that, but you're physically writing it, as he's typing on his on his laptop. So I'm not a good typer. So I literally wrote out all 80,000 words with a pen on paper. So I'm actually embarrassed to admit that. But what we're trying to do now is we're creating kind of a blueprint for life that we can give to kids as they're thinking about their next steps between high school and what they want to do. And this is kind of a guide that you can use either as a 4-week, a 6-week, or 8-week course, where you read some of the chapters and then you answer these really deep questions. And our goal is, once they're done filling this out and getting through all these questions, they'll have a new outlook on what the possibilities are. And that's really all we want to do, is show that there are alternative paths to success and what those possibilities are, and who you are as a person determines what that might be. So we're finishing up that now. We're looking to get it implemented into some of these after school programs, like junior achievement and boys and girls clubs and that kind of thing. So far, so good.
Fantastic. Before we go, certainly we have a couple minutes left, but just a couple. Maybe you could tell people where they can get the book, where they can see you if you have social media presence, that kind of thing. So all that typical stuff in the 21st century.
Oh, it's easy to find me. I'm at the Columbus Museum of Art. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we have a website. We're pretty easy to find. And you just call the museum and ask for Nannette, and I'm the only Nannette they have. So I'm pretty easy to find.
Same here. You can find me at the University of Akron Archives. We have a Facebook page, social media, mostly through our university libraries. We're part of the libraries at the University of Akron. I don't have my own personal Facebook page, but if you go on to the University of Akron's B Press or Institution Repository site, there's a selected works page for university faculty. So I have a page on there with not only a list to this book, but some other projects I've been involved with. Oh, and I should mention that the university is celebrating its 150th anniversary this year. So another project I've been involved in is our it's not really a history, but more of a collection of memories about the university over the last 50 years of our history. And that's also out by the University of Akron Press. You can find that book on the UA Press website, as well as the Goodyear book, as well as on Amazon and at the Buckeye Book Fair. And tomorrow, anybody that lives in Northeast Ohio, I'll be at the Learned Owl signing books there as well. So 2 to 4, I believe. Thank you.
Yeah, mine's pretty easy too. It's just kenrusk.com. You can also go to Blue Collar Cash and look up what we're doing there. I have a Facebook page. It's called Ken Rusk Official. And what we try to do is we list a lot of content there in blogs, and we talk about what we're doing with helping people look for jobs and the different possibilities and things like that. So you can find us there as well. The book is for sale on all the typical ones: Amazon, Indie Books. Don't forget to support those Indie Books stores, and Apple Books and all those other places, Barnes and Nobles. But one thing I do want to mention is I've been a 20-year supporter of Make-A-Wish. It's something I've believed in my entire business career. I love helping these fighters, and we get involved in their lives and their wishes and whatnot. And if you do buy the book, Blue Collar Cash, it's a great idea for a gift for someone, for maybe for Christmas. Just know that I donate all of my author proceeds towards Make-A-Wish wishes for those kids that are fighting their way through some pretty tough times. So I just want to mention that in case anyone wants to go out and pick it up, you know, you're going to do a good thing at the same time.
Wow, that's great. For me, my webpage is just my name, so it's bobbatchelor.com. You can find me and my books pretty easily on Facebook. My previous books, I wrote a biography of the infamous Cincinnati bootleg king, George Remus. Prior to that, I wrote a biography of the Marvel co-creator of Spider-Man, Avengers, etc., Stan Lee. So I have Facebook pages set up for those books. The Rookwood book, obviously, you can get through the Buckeye Book Fair with the signed book plates. You can also go to rookwood.com. They are selling autographed copies. And I would just like to end by saying how wonderful this is been for me. I have some great affection for each one of your books, even though I didn't tell you that, but I do. Nannette, I am a huge George Bellows fan. I'm also a huge Joyce Carol Oates fan, who I met one time ago. And just the name Nannette. My wife's name is Suzette, so any et names I particularly love. So there's that. Vic, I used to live in Monroe Falls. I taught at Kent State, like you. I got a master's degree at Kent State in history. I have done a ton of research on synthetic rubber in World War II, and hope to someday write a book about the vital significance of rubber at war. So I've spent a lot of time in the Goodyear archives, and I love, my favorite part of the Goodyear past during that time is when Goodyear was creating like fake airplanes and to fool the Germans, they'd have a big that looked absolutely authentic, and the synthetic rubber. And Ken, I have taught in the college level for 16 and a half years. And I wish that I would have had your book 16 and a half years ago to give to students who came to me and said, I wish I had a different path, because I think what you're putting at, you know, the ideas in your book are fantastic and should be more widespread. The idea that college is for everyone is absolutely crazy, and we need skilled blue collar workers. So I have loved the heck out of this, and I appreciate each one of you so much. And if I were a millionaire, I'd buy 1,000 copies of each of your books. And I hope people go out and buy them for Christmas. And I'd like to thank the Buckeye Book Fair for giving us this opportunity. It's a wonderful organization, and one that I hope we can all see each other next year live and in color. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks, everybody. Good luck to y'all. Stay safe.
Thank you all so much for joining us for our Ohio History panel. I want to thank our wonderful panelists and our fabulous moderators. We'd also like to thank our generous sponsors for making the 2020 virtual Buckeye Book Fair possible. Please visit our website at buckeyebookfair.org to purchase signed copies of all our panelists' books tonight. Our final program for the book fair will be our Modern Ohio panel tomorrow evening at 6:30 p.m. Please join us for that, and we hope you have a great evening.